Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, now on the Prime Minister and her Brexit war cabinet on an away day at Chequers for an afternoon of wining and dining and to resolve the ongoing cabinet feuds over her Brexit plans, she hopes. Joining us is Guardian columnist Owen Jones and commentator for the Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges. I'm guaranteeing that they'll have different views. Who should we start with? Let's start with Dan today for a change. Hi, Dan. She's got to bang their heads together. Will it make any difference?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, I think actually, obviously, I mean, our focus is very much on what's going on down at Chequers. I mean, I do think, actually, as ever with Brexit, I do think the story may be moving on, though, because whilst Theresa May is trying to get agreement amongst her cabinet, there are now starting to be some real whispers that she's in real trouble with her backbenchers. We've got this speech that we're expecting next week from Jeremy Corbyn, in which now it now looks like he will finally sign Labour up to a position of staying within the customs union. That's a position, that's a red line for many of Theresa May's Brexiteers and something she herself has ruled out. But we also understand now there may be a significant, or certainly sufficient, Tory rebels on that issue who will be prepared to vote with Labour and defeat Theresa May on that. Now, if that were to happen, that would be very, very serious indeed. So, whilst she may secure some measure of agreement down in Chequers, as I said, that reaching agreement with the entirety of her backbench party may now be the bigger priority for her.
So the mice are running riot at the House of Commons while the cats are whining and dining at Chequers, then, Owen?
Well, yeah, I mean, sorry to disappoint you, but I agree with a lot of Dan's analysis there. I think the problem is that, look, there's all this talk about the failure to come up with an end destination point for Brexit from Theresa May, that what does Brexit actually look like for her? And the problem she has are there are irreconcilable divisions within the Conservative Party. Let's not forget the EU referendum, and I say this as someone who supported Remain but accepts the result, but the EU referendum was called in order to manage those internal divisions, but they haven't gone away. You've got some within the Conservative Party who want regulatory convergence with the EU. Those are the regulations governing everything from, I don't know, health and safety to animal welfare, and others who want divergence. We've got this situation with the customs union where Theresa May is now going to delay, it's been revealed today, votes on the customs and trade bill because she thinks she'll lose. She's been trying to stop Labour having opposition days because she fears that will lead to more releases being demanded of official government documents. So I think the problem is, you know, the Jacob Rees-Moggs of this world, the 60, 70 very hardcore Brexiteers who are MPs, for them, you know, Brexit is the most important thing that's ever happened in their lives. Jacob Rees-Mogg calls it like Magna Carta and the Battle of Waterloo. They are simply not going to allow the sort of Brexit which might be compatible with having a secure, prosperous economic future for this country. And it's very, very difficult for her in any meaningful way to stand up to them. So that's why I think we're in this mess at the moment.
Dan Hodges, what a mess. What's she going to do?
Well, I'm not entirely sure at the moment. I mean, I think obviously Owen is right when he highlights the opposition she faces from her Eurosceptic backbenchers. But the trouble for Theresa May is that the real danger that is now emerging for her isn't from, if you were like, the usual sort of Eurosceptic suspects. It's actually from that small but nonetheless increasingly influential group of Tory Remainers, and the real threat to her now isn't actually coming at the moment from the Jacob Rees-Moggs. It's actually coming from the Anna Soubrys and the Ken Clarks. That's where the danger lies, because obviously well, she doesn't have a formal majority. Obviously, her working majority in Parliament is so small that she's now getting this pincer movement. But as I say, I think at the moment, I think the real headache for Downing Street and what is worrying Downing Street sort of this evening is how can they placate this small group of Tory Remainers who may well start to align themselves with Labour. Now, there is one caveat, which is obviously this all depends on what Jeremy Corbyn says next week. We are all assuming now that he's going to say he's going to sign up Labour to remaining in, if not the customs union, a customs union. There is still some internal opposition within the shadow cabinet, particularly from John McDonnell, I understand, to that. But we do accept that that will be Labour's position from next week. And if that does happen, then Theresa May does face this threat from the Labour Party on one hand and this small core of very resilient Tory Remainers.
OK. Owen, your thought on that?
Of course, what we see, because the Tories lost their majority, it means that both factions of the Conservative Party can flex their muscles, and indeed that's what the Remainers are doing. They are doing it, though, because at the moment, those who've dictated the direction of Theresa May's Brexit policy have been the hardcore Brexiteers. Now, on that point about a customs union, clearly it's critical for this country to remain in a customs union, because otherwise it will be impossible to avoid a hard border in Ireland, which could potentially jeopardise the peace process. Now, given already Theresa May is dependent on the Democratic Unionist Party, a party which is the political wing of the 17th century, quite frankly, she can't present herself as an honest broker as things stand within the Irish peace process. We obviously have direct rule. We don't have the power-sharing government in place in Northern Ireland. The idea of having a hard border. Now, look, I could sit here all day criticising Tony Blair and his failings and betrayals and all the rest, but one of the great achievements of that government, and indeed in this country in the last quarter of a century, is the Irish peace process. And John Major, the former Tory Prime Minister, himself said there was a threat of the men of violence returning. So that is what could be at stake. And that's why it's absolutely critical that you don't have the likes of the Jacob Rees-Moggs. And I have to say, the likes of Daniel Hannan, another right-wing Tory MEP, they're increasingly now out there, you can see it, writing pieces in newspapers, tweets and all the rest of it, saying that the Irish Good Friday Agreement needs to be renegotiated. Why are they doing that? What are they doing here what they're doing is playing with fire, which is because they know it's impossible to get the form of Brexit they want without undermining the peace process. They're now calling it into question altogether. It's a very dangerous game that wing of the Tory party are playing, and I'm afraid they are holding this government to ransom to a degree. Yeah,
the Prime Minister needs to keep an eye on what's going on in Ireland, doesn't she? And that border could do for her, Dan.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting what Owen said there, because obviously Owen is someone, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, who is quite closely aligned with the current Labour leadership, and I think that the argument we've just seen deployed from Owen there, I suspect is the argument we're going to see deployed next week from Jeremy Corbyn, in which he will use the Irish border issue as the rationale for shifting Labour into a position of support for a customs union. Now, it's worth pointing out, obviously, we've been focusing on Theresa May's sort of slightly shambolic positioning on Brexit. I mean, Labour has had its own sort of similarly shambolic positioning on unclear positioning on Brexit and its own divisions. But I do think, as I say, and I think Owen's made clear, we will see this move next week, which then raises a fascinating question for those Tory Brexit Remainers, which is, are they prepared to stick to their guns and defeat Theresa May on an issue that could, I mean, that would be a very serious issue. If they did defeat her on the customs union issue, then you are then raising the prospect of a stance that could potentially bring down her government.
Well, I should say I'm a spokesperson for myself only, but the point I made about a customs union is a fairly obvious one. There is no way of getting around the Irish border without some form of a customs union. But the other point that I wanted to bring in, I worry this has been missing a lot in this whole discussion of Brexit when we focus on the trading and agreements and our exact relationship with the European Union. Do you remember when Theresa May became Prime Minister and she stood on the steps of Downing Street and spoke of the burning injustices that had led to Brexit in the first place? And now, I mean, she's framed it, apparently. She's so proud of that speech. But in terms of many of those burning injustices, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of secure, well-paid jobs, stagnating and falling wages, those former industrial communities which were abandoned and allowed to rot, with a lack, again, of secure jobs and a future for many of the people who live there, who were abandoned by successive governments, many of them who voted for Brexit, there has been no progress whatsoever, quite the opposite, on dealing with those massive injustices which Theresa May herself accepted had helped pave the way for Brexit. So when we talk about Brexit, yes, let's talk about a customs union, the single market, a regulatory diversion and all the rest, or convergence. But let's also get back to what the Prime Minister herself spoke about, which is having a radical domestic agenda which deals with those massive injustices which the Conservative Party are incapable of dealing with, because the social order that governs this country is incapable of meeting the needs of millions of people. That's why we've ended up with Brexit. That's why we ended up with the general election result. And because of this paralysed, chaotic, zombie government, there's no way of dealing with those underlying injustices that led to Brexit in the first place.
Guys, we're out of time. It's good to talk to you as always. Thanks very much indeed. Started with Dan, ended with Owen. Who knows what will happen next time?
I've been getting away with it.